If this was just one of those things you invite me because I was the preacher's kid, but apparently this year you didn't. You brought me back, so we'll see how next summer goes. Super excited about your new preacher. I got an email, I guess, yesterday, and it had preaching minister on there, and just super excited about the many answered prayers, and so awesome to be here with you. I want to start just with 3 quick stories about being on airplanes, all right? And then I want to open up Luke chapter 15 for us tonight. Back in the first weekend in March in 2020, so this is the weekend before COVID shut everything down, I was flying out to D.C. to speak at a kind of a East Coast Christian lectureship, and I'd been out there a few times, and I boarded the plane to fly out, and as I boarded, there was an empty seat next to me. I was on the aisle. The window seat was next to me, and this 18, 19-year-old kid came and sat down by me. And I could tell he had never been on an airplane before because he couldn't figure out how to put the seatbelt on. He couldn't figure out if it was a magnet or what to do. So I wasn't going to be that creep who reaches over and puts a seatbelt on an 18 or 19-year-old. So I took mine off, and I was like, hey, just do what I do. So I showed him how to click a seatbelt on an airplane. And then we start moving, and he's like a little kid, not just an 18 or 19-year-old. He was so excited about everything. The plane's backing up right now. I'm like, I know, that's what we do. He's like, the plane, we're going fast. I'm like, that's what planes do. He's like, oh man, you can see people in the backyard. And he was so excited to see people. You can see cars on the road. And then we went through the clouds, and he's like, you can see the clouds out the window. And then he put his head back and started spinning, and he grabbed his stomach. And if you know anything about me, my greatest phobia in life is throw up. Now, I'm better since I'm a dad. I'm not this person, if you throw up around me, I throw up. It said, if you throw up around me, I will despise you for the rest of your life. So I was like, oh, God, you got to help me right now. So I handed him that bag, that they have on the airplanes. I was like, man, this is what it's for. And I was like, you know what? Look at me right now. And he looked at me, and I said, you're going to do what I do. And I said, you're going to breathe how I breathe. And we're going to take 5 deep breaths together. I'm sure I took this out of a page from my mom in some therapy session. He did what I did. We took 5 deep breaths together. And then he looked at me, and he was like, I think I'm better. And about 30 minutes later, we hit some turbulence, and he looked at me, and he's like, can we do that breathing thing again? So I was like, sure, man, yeah. So we took a few more deep breaths together. What was so ironic is I was getting off a plane to speak at this event on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., and the name of the event was called Breathe. Based on Ezekiel chapter 37, where there is this vision that Ezekiel receives about all these bones that are coming back together, and then flesh is put on the bones, and it looks like it's alive, but it's not alive because the breath of God hasn't entered into them. And this was a week before COVID was going to shut things down for a short period of time. And little did I know how many times God was going to have to be the one patting my leg saying, hey, I need you to breathe the way I breathe. Have you ever been through that period or a season of your life where you just felt like the breath was kind of knocked out of you, like you were struggling just to find your rhythm? I've been around a lot of teenagers and young people over the last couple of weeks, and just the rhythm from the summer to a school year, and for public school, private school, homeschool, even if you don't have kids in school, it feels like the rhythm around it just shifts a little bit. So let me illustrate like this. All right, I have a cigarette lighter. I don't smoke cigarettes, but here we go, all right? And I don't know if you can see that flame, but can you think about a time in your life when there was a fire of God burning in your belly? Can you think of a revival, a church camp experience, a mission trip experience? Maybe you've a song that is sung in church sometimes, and it just feels like the fire of God is just stirring in your heart. You know what I'm saying? If you had that. And then there are times when it feels like just life is just the stress of life, it's just drowning the flame out of you. And where I experience this a lot is I'm a preacher, I'm not a youth minister, but I do have the honor of speaking in front of probably a few thousand teenagers every year. Church camps, retreats, things like that. And I experience this with teenagers all the time. In August, it just feels like the fire that was burning in them on church camps and mission trips, and then school year starts, and it's like they just lose that flame a little bit. Or there's a retreat that just lights a fire in them, but then like just the pace of life, the rhythm of life seems to drown it out. And sometimes it feels like we just cannot find that flame again. Have you ever been there? I'm not talking about losing your salvation and needing back in. I'm just talking about what feels like the fire of God that was burning in your belly, and you're like, I would do anything to have that flame back. And sometimes what it takes is for somebody else who has the flame, or for Jesus, who is the light of the world, who can come back to us and like light and relight. This is what the church does for each other. That when somebody is struggling, finding that flame because they've been drowning in life, we come along because we're following the light of the world to help light and relight the flame inside of people. And I've talked with my parents enough to know just the last few days in Decatur, like you have been hit with a lot of grief. You, the church, you are the person who can be that light in other people's lives to bring them back to life. And what I needed back in 2020 was that reminder of God about breathing. I'm here to light and relight. So that's story number one. Story number two. I was on a flight last year. I sat next to this woman. The moment she sits down next to me, she pulls out her phone, and I'm not exaggerating at all. We were on this plane about 80 minutes. And for 80 minutes, she did nothing but take selfies on her phone. She didn't stop for anything. She didn't stop to get the snack, didn't stop to get the drink, nothing. 80 minutes of selfies, probably not hundreds. We're probably into the thousands of the number of selfies she took. She would flip the hair around her right ear, take a selfie. Go around the left ear, a selfie. I almost started just leaning over to try to get in a few of them. I was like, it was so annoying. And I didn't want to be that creep that's like staring at her phone, but I was looking at her phone to see how much battery life was still on it, because I saw 36, and I start praying. I'm like, God, can you take it from 36 to 0? And I know this sounds so judgmental, but my thought in my head, because I had no opportunity to have a conversation with this woman at all, was there are people, maybe not just her, there are people who are so obsessed with their image, either because they really love who they are or they can't stand who they are. I had one other flight with this guy. And this guy gets on the plane. It's one of those flights that I booked. It was 5:30 in the morning, which means you got to get to the airport really early. And when I book these flights, I'm excited because I'm like, early flight, I can get where I need to go early. The day before, you're like, why did I book a 5:30 a.m. flight? This is an awful idea. And at most people on 5:30 a.m. flights, they get on and they're quiet. They just want to kind of go back to sleep. And there's always that one person. And you could tell this one guy, he rounded the corner to come on that plane, and he was one big piece of talk. Like he was so excited to be alive. He's high-fiving. If you had a sports shirt on, he's wanting to talk about whoever, Ja Morant or whoever it was, like just so giddy. And as he turned the corner, and I consider myself a very outgoing guy, but if you ever prayed those prayers, you're like, God, please not by me. Please not by the empty seat that I had. Sure enough, he sits right next to me. And this guy had like the way he walked was with his chest out, so much confidence. Starts chatting it up with the woman next on the other side of him and just is talking. And then he kind of got into this quiet place, and he had his phone out. And his phone was on his lap, but it was facing me. And I say that because I was not trying to read what was on his notes, but his notes were open. And I glanced down, and you know how sometimes when you glance, you just see things that are written. So it's not that I was trying to look at what was written on his notes, but I could see he had been typing something out. And it started like this. It said, I never thought divorce would be how our relationship would end. But I know that we both want to be happy and at peace. And I stopped reading. And I glanced up to see a tear coming down his cheek. And now I'm wrestling with, do I say, sir, I saw your notes? I'm a minister. You want to talk about it? Like I didn't know what to do in the moment. But it made me think about, here's this guy that looked like there was so much confidence in it. He had things put together and just wanted to help bring the world to life, yet inside it was like so much brokenness going on inside of him. So I didn't say anything. It did give me something to pray for him. All right, so if you go to this next slide, and this is totally a shameless plug real quick. I wrote a new book. I talked about this book when I was here about a year ago. Wrote a new book, Coreology, just helping the church kind of work through election seasons. I don't know if you knew there's an election season in 2024, but sometimes Christians can get knocked off track a little bit. So it's the image of those rumble strips that are on a highway. And whenever you hit those rumble strips, they're not telling you that you're far off course. A lot of times it's not saying you need to overly correct. The rumble strips are there to let you know, hey, you're veering off track just a little bit. Let's get back on track. So I wrote this book from a pastoral voice. I'm not trying to be a prophet. I want to be a blessing and try to give a hopeful, helpful word to the church. So you can get it on Amazon, physical book, ebook. You got an audio book that's coming out here. Morgan Freeman did it. I'm just joking. It's my voice. But check it out. My kids need to go to college. No, but you can check it out. I'm not talking about the book tonight. If you go to this next slide. In Luke chapter 15, I'm about to summarize all of Luke chapter 15 for us here in about 20 minutes, all right? I want you to see Luke chapter 15, verse 1 and 2. And if you know anything about Luke chapter 15, it's about lost things that are found. So even if you look in the subtitles in your Bibles, Luke chapter 15 is known by the negative. If you look at the subtitles, it probably says in verse 3, above verse 3, that it's a story about a lost sheep. And then in verse 8, it's a story about a lost coin. And then beginning in verse 11, it's a story about a lost son. Maybe you have a version that says lost sons, but probably singular, it's a lost son. And what happens in all three stories is something is lost, and then you have somebody who seeks out what is lost. You have something that is found, and then you have a party that is thrown. So the subtitles very well could be three things that are found: a found coin, a found sheep, a found son. Or, even better, it could be a party for a sheep that was found, or a party for a coin that was found. But it begins in chapter 15, verse 1 and 2. And if you take notes in your Bible, if you draw things or write things, I would encourage you in verse 3, verse 8, and verse 11 to reference back to verse 1 and 2. So I don't know if you ever draw arrows in your Bible or some kind of reminder. Everything that happens in Luke chapter 15, the context is set in verse 1 and 2. So here's the setting for the three different stories Jesus tells. And the setting is there were tax collectors and sinners. Kind of two big groups of people, right? Tax collectors and sinners. They were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they grumbled. And they said, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. So the context is you have a group of people who are coming to hear Jesus, and they are leaning in to learn from what Christ has to say. And you have a group of people who are there, and they are not there to lean in. They are there to find something that they can pick apart. All right, now most churches aren't 50-50 on this. Most churches are probably more 98-2. Sometimes that Pharisee teacher of the law, the grumbling group, they can be loud even though they may be small. But in this context, I just want you to see there's a group of people who were leaning in, the people leaning in are those who are kind of have been pushed to the margins of society, and those who are kind of in the in crowd when it comes to the religious group are those who are there to grumble and to complain and to find something that they can pick apart. And then Jesus starts telling stories. And if you go to the next slide, go one more. And there are three stories. And the story number one is a story about a sheep that was lost and a sheep that was found. Repeat after me. No, don't repeat after me. All right, it's all right. A sheep that was lost and a sheep that was found. Now, what's kind of ironic, and I wonder if Jesus told this story with a little bit of sarcasm, that when the sheep is lost, when it's found, the shepherd throws a big party. And I can't help but think Jesus told this with a grin on his face. If somebody were to call you today and say, my dog ran away for an hour, but we found my dog, and now we want to throw a big party because we found my dog that was lost for an hour. Some of you are just tell me where the party's happening. I'm gonna show up. Some of you be like, that sounds like a really weird thing to throw a big banquet for. So in a way, Jesus, I think, is telling the story with a little bit of humor, but there's something that is lost outside of the house. And I want you to catch that in the first story Jesus tells. There is something that is lost, a sheep, and it's not lost inside of a house, it's lost outside of a house. So if you're taking notes at all, I want you just to catch that. It's an image of something that is lost outside of a house, and there's a shepherd who goes to find it. And then the very next story Jesus tells is a story about a coin that is lost inside of a house. Now, especially in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus does this sometimes. In fact, when it comes to parables, I don't know if you've noticed this, but in Matthew and Mark, a lot of the parables Jesus tells in Matthew and Mark, they're about nature and they're about agriculture. But in the Gospel of Luke, most of Jesus' parables are about human relationships. So in Luke is where you get, like Luke chapter 10, the Good Samaritan, or Luke 18, the woman who goes before a judge and she's pounding on the door to get an answer for, her request. You get a lot more parables about human relationships, and Luke 15 is like one of those. It's about human relationships. There are times in the Gospel of Luke when Luke will tell you two stories, and he's making the same point, but he's telling it almost for two different audiences. So for here, he starts off with a story about a shepherd and sheep, and then he tells a story about a woman who loses a coin inside of a house. So he's trying to capture a male audience and a female audience, or those who are, their hands are always like they're doing things that deal with agriculture, or those who deal with things that are inside of a house. This woman, she loses a coin, and when she finds it, she throws a party. Again, I think there's a little humor in this. Because if somebody were to tell you, I lost $10, but I found it in the couch. Let's have a banquet Friday night. Let's get together at Casa Torres and let's celebrate because I lost a little bit of money and I found it. Like this, I don't know, you may be like, that sounds like a weird reason to throw a party, but something was found, they throw a party. So I want you to see in the first two parables, is parable number one, there is something that is lost and it's lost outside of a house. And the parable number two, there's something that is lost and it's lost inside of a house. And then in verse 11, you get a story it's actually a story about two sons. Usually we think about this being a story about one son, but it starts off, if you go to the next slide. It's a parable about a father and two sons. In verse 11, it tells you this. Right, and it does start off with a story about a younger son who goes to his father and asks for an inheritance. It's basically a way of saying, Dad, I wish you weren't alive. Go ahead and give me my inheritance now. Now, according to Deuteronomy chapter 21, the younger son receives a smaller amount as an inheritance than the other children, which I want to follow the Bible in my life, all right? So I think that if there are parents in the room who have an older and a younger son, then the younger son should probably get less than what the older son receives. So, just, y'all good? Deuteronomy chapter 21. All scripture is God-breathed, all right, Deuteronomy 21. You know how the story goes, probably. I mean, the younger son, he goes and he squanders all of it, right? Just wild living. And in verse 17, and in most of your versions, what verse 17 says, when he came to his senses. Some of your versions may say, when he came to himself. I like that idea. I don't really like the idea, but it's given me a way to pray for people. That in verse 17, it says, when he came to his senses. You think about like all of his senses after he has lost everything. This guy, he hears pigs, sees pigs, is tasting what pigs eat. He's touching pigs. Like all of his senses, like he realizes the decisions I've made have led me to this. And sometimes it's the prayer I pray for people who have kind of turned their back on God, is that they'll come to their senses. Like that God would wake them up to see that the decisions I'm making in my life have put me where I am right now, and that they will see that everything around them are things that are leading to destruction, not to the kind of life that God intends. It's not that I'm praying harm on anybody, but that God would open up all of their senses to see that there is a better way for them to live. I came across this quote, and if you go to this next slide, I came across this quote a while back, and anytime I've preached Luke 15 and I've chosen to use this quote, I always have to give a little context around it, especially if I'm preaching Luke 15 with a crowd of young people, teenagers, college students. Like the only way to the Father is through the far country. Now, If I'm preaching, and back in June I had a chance to speak at this event with a lot of folks who were in a recovery ministry. So they're recovering from all forms of addiction. And this is a quote that many of them get. Like, the only way to the Father is through the far country, because most of the people in that room, they understood what the far country was. And for any of us who've been to the far country, you've experienced seasons of rebellion in your life, you get it. There is a God who loves us so much, a God who can find us in a far country, open up all of our senses in the far country. What I don't want is for young people to think that for them to understand the grace of God, that they've got to go to a far country too. I especially want young people to believe that the same grace of God that can find them in the far country is the grace of God that can protect them from ever going to the far country in the first place. So I always want to be careful with a quote like this. But for the younger son and the prodigal son, he gets it. He goes to the far country, and then he's like, man, I had it so much better back home. So what he tells himself is, I'm going to go back home, and I'm just going to tell my dad, I don't even belong to be your son anymore. Just make me a slave. I just want to be home. Now, whenever we read parables, I think we have to be real careful of assigning characters. This is exactly what God is like, because I don't think God is like the Father and that God is just waiting on a porch for people to come home. When we read the Bible, God is on the move. God is searching for people. But it is a beautiful story Jesus tells about a father who sees a son who is lost, and a father who doesn't wait on the son to come all the way to him, but rushes to the son to welcome him home. Beautiful story. So Luke chapter 15 and verse 3 is about a story that something is lost outside of the house. And the first story told about a son is a son who is lost outside of a house. But then the story turns to an older son. An older son who is, in almost every way you think about it, was inside of the house, worked for his dad, lived there, seems to have been a faithful son. Yet this son comes home, and it's kind of funny if you think about it. He could hear music and dancing. It's one thing if you can hear music. It's another thing if you can hear dancing. This is a banquet and a party that is happening. And the older son hears it and is wondering what goes on, what's happening. And he is told that the younger son came home and dad threw a party for him. And now he becomes an older son who is lost inside of a house. He's inside of the house, but he doesn't understand. What Jesus ends up doing is telling a parable. Getting back to that community of people in verse 1 and 2, where Jesus is, it's a story of, look, you don't have to be a prodigal to have a heart that's far from God. And there are people in our churches every Sunday who show up and sing the songs and take communion and read their Bibles, yet their hearts are far from their Father. And there are those God is welcoming into his presence and into the church who don't feel like they are worthy, maybe like the younger son. And there are those who feel so worthy that they refuse to enter into parties and banquets for those who they think are not worthy to be drawn into the community. Now, I don't want you to let the conditions and all the little details, especially about the younger son, to keep us from seeing the point of the story. Because I think the point of Luke chapter 15 is not that there's a son who goes wild, but there is a father who pursues his kids and will do anything to find his kids. In fact, if you go to the next verse in Luke chapter 15, verse 11, and I have it written here, it's that there's a story. If you go to that next slide, there's a father who had two sons. Now, if you go to the next image, is there one? Yeah, right there. Thank you so much. I want you to think just a moment about a diamond, because I bet most of you in this room have a diamond about this size. It's kind of chilling in your living room a little bit. If you've ever been to a jewelry store just to look at a diamond, it's always placed on black velvet. They don't put it in, people who are selling jewelry, they don't put it in their bare hand to let you see it. There's something about the black velvet that makes it pop and makes it shine. And sometimes we can read Bible stories like Luke chapter 15, and we get lost in all the details about things that are lost, or the details about the younger son, about going wild and all the things he was doing. And we can miss that the diamond in the story is a father who chases his kids. It's not just about a younger son who finds life. It's about a father who chases kids. Now, you could go home tonight and you could Google art about the prodigal son, and you would have over 13 million pictures that would pop up. Like, this is such an intriguing story. There are non-Christians around the world who know very little about the Christian story or about the Bible, yet they probably know what the prodigal son is about. Like, this is a story that people use all around the world. And if you go to the next image, in the 1600s, there was an artist named Murillo. And what he did, and I'm not going to show you all 6 of these, but he had 6 paintings, large paintings, that just slowly depicted the journey of the prodigal son. And this is one where the younger son is coming and asking for his inheritance. And if you go to the next slide, you have one where this is the son who's being sent off. And the way he painted this, and he was painting in a time when there was a plague that like hit his country, which some people wonder if there was something about Luke 15 and a father who pursues his sons that was like good news for the people who were suffering in his community. But you see like a whole family that is mourning as the younger son is choosing to leave, and how the younger son is dressed like, I mean, he's almost dressed like royalty as he's sent off. And then if you go to the next image, and you can go and look at all 6 of these, but the last one is the one of the, no, I'm sorry, go to one right before that. No, the other way. Yeah, right there. Hey, and you're doing great, by the way. I'm not the easiest person to follow. I have so much grace for people who do tech in our churches. They're the best, man, really. But you can see this image of this son who left looking like royalty, and he comes home with hardly anything on, like just begging to have a place in the house. There's an artist named Swan, and if you go just to the next image, in 1888, he drew this, and you just see this young son just in this desperate state of being surrounded by pigs, and it's just this painting of desperation. But the one that most people have probably seen, if you go to the next image and stay here just for a moment, is Rembrandt. I mean, some of you may have this in your home. This is a famous one. Now, Rembrandt, here's what's interesting about this painting. He lived to be 62 years old. And this is one of the very last things he did. Like, he died just a few months after he painted this. And it's interesting, and look at, if you look at the hands, he purposely painted the left hand as the hand of a man and the right hand as the hand of a woman. Now, he's painting back in the 1600s. This is not about unisex or sexuality, like nothing like that. But it was his idea of like the fatherly and motherly like heart of God that just pursues kids. What's interesting in the painting too is that like this piece of art, you have this younger son, and you can see it's a pretty dark painting, but the light is coming down on the younger son, but there's also light that's kind of shining on the older son too. And Rembrandt painted this at the age of 62 years old. But what most people don't know is this isn't the only painting Rembrandt painted of the prodigal son. Back when he was 29 years old, and if you go to the next painting, he painted a different painting of the prodigal son. And even though this is hundreds of years ago, this is a self-portrait. He painted his face in the sun. And this is like when the son goes wild. That's his wife's face on the woman. And Rembrandt, like a lot of artists, didn't like take time to like explain his art, but you wonder at the age of 29, like why was this the part of the story that was so intriguing to him? That at the age of 29, what he chose to paint was this younger son going wild, but when he's 62, he's painting a story about a son who comes home to his father. That maybe there was something in his life. I don't want to try to paint Rembrandt as some prodigal son who ran away and came back to God, but there was something about the story that toward the end of his life, he just wanted to be welcomed into the arms of God. According to Luke chapter 15, and if you go to that next slide, the next one after this. According to Luke 15, there is a condition worse than death, and it's being lost. And sometimes, and I know when we talk about being lost, we can talk about like being disconnected from God for eternity. But sometimes, like To be lost is like you just lose your sense of direction. This is a story of two brothers who won't step into the father's house, but a father who would leave the house to find a son. It's a story of a father who had two sons, and he loves his two sons, and he went out to his two sons, and he was generous to both. It's a story of extraordinary grace and offensive grace. It's a story that highlights dead things coming to life. And for the church, it's a story that we hold up for eternity until Jesus comes back to let other people know that it's time to come home and welcome home and come and step into the house. And either you come step into our party, or when Jesus is working a wonder in your life, we're going to step into yours. I want to end just with this one last story, and I may have shared some of this with you before. About a decade ago, I was working through a book, Re-Entry, and talking about light and darkness, and I came upon this story from Rjukan, Norway. I've never been there. Think it would be fun one day. If you go to this next image, and just stay here just for a moment, Rjukan, Norway was developed a little over 100 years ago, and as you can see, it's down in a valley in Norway. There's a waterfall, a pretty huge waterfall there in Rjukan that over 100 years ago, they discovered that it could generate hydroelectricity. So Adolf Hitler was trying to win this valley because of all he could do with the hydroelectricity. He wasn't able to do it. It's a town of a few thousand people, but when they developed this town, I don't know if they realized it when they did or not, but 4 months out of the year, they cannot see the sun. There's sunlight, there's daylight, I guess I should say there's daylight, but they can't see the sun. So for those 4 months of a year back in the 1920s, the community was like, we should be able in these 4 months to have a way that we can experience the sun, to feel the sun. So if you go to the next image, what they ended up doing is they developed these cable cars about 100 years ago that would take them up to the top of a mountain where they made a cafe where you could go up there to sip on coffee and eat your cheesecake and you could see the sun. And this is really good, like for people's psyche and just to be able to see the sun. Well, about 20 years ago, there were people in the community, and the people were like, we shouldn't have to go up to a mountain 4 months a year to see the sun. We should be able to bring the sun to us, which is a wild idea. But their idea was that they worked together with some engineers and some artists to think up, okay, what if we developed mirrors that were big enough to reflect the sun down into the valley? But it was going to cost about $1.5 million. In which the community knew this is tax money. So there were some people who were like, there's so many other things we could do with that money. We don't need to put mirrors up. If you go to the next image, the people who wanted the mirrors, they won out. So they placed them at the top of the mountain, and the first day that the mirrors reflected the sun down into the valley. And if you go to the next couple of images, you see all these people who gathered for this experience. If you go to the next one, you can see it only shines into the size of about a basketball court, so it's not like it lights up the whole town, but the town is able to gather in that area, and the sun comes to them. And if you go to this last image, this is one of my favorites. Like the first day, it reflected down into the valley. Like these people are in beach chairs with their drinks with umbrellas and sunglasses. And for the people who didn't want the mirrors, when they saw the smiles on the faces who experienced the sun, they were like, okay, maybe this isn't a bad idea after all. And as I saw this whole image of there are multiple ways I think this describes who the church is called to be. I bet you can think about people in your life that when you were in a valley and you were in the shadows, they carried you up to experience the light of God. And sometimes what the church does is we take people to go see the light. And sometimes what the church does is we reflect the light down into the valleys and the shadows. And one thing in my 20 years of knowing the Decatur church, you have done both of these so well. You carry people up to experience the light of God. And you deeply desire to reflect the light of God in the community and all those around you. And whether people are lost because they've never surrendered their life to Jesus, or they are lost because they have just lost a sense of direction, you have been commissioned by God to be the light of the world for them. So be like the Father in Luke 15. Keep pursuing people. Don't just wait for them to come to you. Chase after them. And when they experience the light of God, you be the first ones that either throw the party or step into a party to celebrate what God has done. I love you. Thanks for loving me and my family. Hopefully this won't be my last time to ever be with you on a Wednesday night. All right, I think one of your elders is going to come up and pray you out of this place today.
Let's pray. God, we praise you this evening. God, we give you glory for all you are and who you are. God, thank you. Thank you for the message this evening that you spoke. Father, thank you so much for your word that is truly alive. And Father, may we never think that it's just a book of stories. But Father, it's a book of life. And Father, may we be the light, and may we shine your light to those around us. May we be a blessing to those around us for you, so that you will be glorified. And it's all because of your Son, Jesus. And it's through him we pray this evening. Amen.